I'm your host, Lance Graulich, and welcome back to another fabulous episode of the Franchise Fit Podcast. Finding you the perfect fit, and mostly it's you first-time business owners that I enjoy the heck out of talking to every day of my life, it seems. And I have a great franchisee on the show today, and I think for you regular listeners, you know that franchisees are my favorite people to talk to. I love to hear their stories, and this one will not disappoint. Up next.
And, for me, it was sort of, I didn't want my life to pass without me taking the venture into owning my own business.
I want to know in this great story, what point you finally said to your wife, honey, we're starting a side hustle. Because the whole idea here is that you still haven't quit your job.
How can I kind of leapfrog a second and give me a leg up? With a business model that's proven, and all I have to do is work the business.
This episode sponsored by SEO Samba. Empower your franchise with predictable results and AI-driven marketing. Anthony Runnels is from Torrance, Hawthorne, California area, and he is a CPA. Yes, a certified public accountant. And for those of you that know this, I certainly do. I have a couple of CPAs in my family. Boy, they're tough. They're going to scrutinize the heck out of businesses and look at a lot of things. We're going to get to hear his story now. So, Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lance. Great to be on here.
I am super excited to have you. So, why did a CPA choose a home service franchise, and why TRUBLUE?
So I guess it's funny. It starts in my childhood. In my childhood, I was always a builder. I thought I was going to be an engineer, actually. And I would sit in my garage for hours and build model cars and planes and trucks and all types of different things. And so when I got to college, I got to this point where, you had to choose a career. And both of my parents were actually accountants. And so I went to the business school. And so there were really only a few paths. It was either you become an investment banker. I didn't want to work crazy hours. Or you're a consultant, and I didn't want to travel all around and work crazy hours. Or you're an accountant. Those were really only kind of the couple paths that people took. And
So door number three.
Door number three, I took the safer path and maybe something that was a little bit better for work-life balance. And so I was always great in math. I always excelled in school. Math was like a no-brainer to me. And so I kind of naturally just fell into it, truthfully. I started my career at EY. I had done an internship in my junior year.
Ernst Young, for those of you playing along at home, Ernst Young.
Ernst & Young, exactly. And so I took a job. I had an internship. I took a full-time job there. Got my CPA license, but the work was just mundane. I didn't feel like there was any meaning, to the work I was doing. I ended up taking a job at a client of mine, and that really jump-started my career in sort of accountancy profession. And so I worked at a company. We pretty much took the company public. I went to a public company. I was running investor relations at Herbalife. I then went to some startup companies in sort of the media and tech space, and really got, my hands really more, ingrained in both the operations and the finance. And really that was interesting to me. I'm a builder. I love taking a mess and putting it together, and seeing, it's kind of like watching your baby grow. And so some of those companies didn't make it, but that was all good learning. It was all good learning experiences for me to see, what makes companies tick, how the operations work. Really, the importance of the people that you have is everything, and all of those things really helped me in my career. And so most recently, I've been a CFO, even though I also had a couple years where I was COO at a creative ad agency, and I'm actually still splitting my time between TRUBLUE and that venture. I don't exactly know some days how I do it, but I still manage to do it. And so, really over the last couple years, and, I think COVID was a turning point for most people, where we really had a chance to kind of do a lot of self-reflection, evaluate your life. And, for me, it was sort of, I didn't want my life to pass without me taking the venture into owning my own business. And really, I wanted to infuse a lot of my values and my ethics into a company, into the culture. I wasn't able to do that in any of the companies I was working at in corporate America, which are definitely more profit driven, more cutthroat, not as concerned about employees and their welfare. And that was something that just really hit me for many, many years. I really struggled with how do I get out of that? And the problem is the more, as I continue to elevate, it becomes harder to take that leap in that shift. And so, fortunately, my company was sold. I got a decent amount of money out of the deal, and that gave me a bit more comfort in terms of taking the plunge. And really, even when I took the plunge, I still wasn't that totally comfortable. But things that I've learned in life is I never wanted to get to the end of my life in regrets. And so I've always kind of lived that way. And I was fine with that, that if I do this and I completely fail, that's okay. Because at least, I'd be like, at least I tried, and it's
So,
just something
so I
that
want to
was.
know. I want to know in this great story, what point you finally said to your wife, "Honey, we're starting a side hustle." Because the whole idea here is that you still haven't quit your job. You still have a job. But at what point did you say to your wife, "Hey, I'm going to start looking at franchises and I'm not going to quit my job yet, just yet, but I want to really essentially have a side hustle to start"?
Yeah, I really started the beginning of this year. Last year was a very challenging year in terms of from a work perspective. We were trying to sell the company pretty much the entire year, and I was just drained. I truthfully was drained. And so I thought it was a good time to look. And truthfully, I listened to a podcast. I'm a avid podcast listener. And there was a gentleman on there. This was a business podcast. He was talking about franchising. And so I have a friend who I went to school with, and he had a laundromat franchise business. And I remember, a long time ago, him saying how great of a business it was, and then he was going to get a dry cleaning business. So, in terms of franchising, that's all that I really knew. It was like, okay, dry cleaners, laundromats, and then, the brick and
And you've
mortar,
eaten a
the
Big Mac
McDonald's.
once or twice.
Right, right. And then, the McDonald's and the Jack in the Box, and those. And so I wanted a business that felt that I had some interest in and some passion in, but then I've also had this burning desire to want to help people. And so, even there was a stint during my early days in corporate America where I took about a year and I became an investment advisor because I'm like, I want to help people. I want to help people financially. And I became a personal financial planner. The problem with that is that the people I was helping really didn't need as much of the help. They were the rich people. These are folks in Silicon Valley who made a ton of money, during the dot-com boom. And they were the only people who could pay. And so I was struggling where I'm like, I want to help the people. The people who needed the most help were the ones who didn't have as much money, but they can't pay you, right? And so that didn't really work. And so then that stint ended. My wife is like, we got bills to pay. My kids were young. And so then I just went back into corporate America, and there we were. And so yeah, after the podcast, I got to a point where I'm like, okay, I want to. Franchising to me seemed like a good idea because I wanted to be on second base. I didn't want to be stuck on home base and, trickling to first base. I'm like, how can I kind of leapfrog to second and give me a leg up with a business model that's proven, and all I have to do is work the business, and that's sort of where I was at. And then especially a business that wasn't sort of natural to me. I can do accounting work all day long. I can do finance work all day long. That stuff is easy. But going into a new industry, I felt that I needed more support. And so the journey started with, okay, what am I passionate about? And then also what industries did I see as being fruitful? And so I actually had a checklist of a couple things I was looking for. I wanted a business that was AI resistant because AI is going to come and, hack up all of finance eventually. It's already starting to. I wanted a business that was in a sort of a growth area in terms of, and then I also wanted something where there was sort of a consistent demand where there were services that people were going to need no matter what, from now until the time that I'm, not here any longer. And so, I looked at home services was definitely at the top in terms of industries that are good for franchises. And so I started looking at a number of them. I was looking at junk, truck companies. I was like, oh, that could be kind of cool. I was looking at cleaning businesses. I was looking at handyman businesses. We also were looking at senior, like home care businesses. And I eventually landed on TRUBLUE because it sort of hit, handyman, just because, again, like by trade, I'm just kind of a builder person. And then it hit the senior component. And it was honestly just by luck or whatever you want to call it that I just stumbled across TRUBLUE, and I'm like, wait, it has both. Like, this is a no-brainer. And so then I met, everyone I met at TRUBLUE, really had a very kind heart, really, really passionate about helping homeowners and helping seniors age in place gracefully. And, I decided to take the plunge. So, my wife she was all on board with it until I said, you know what, I'm just going to quit my job. I'm tired of this and I'm just going to do it. She's like, whoa, hold on. So that was initially the plan because truthfully, I didn't think I could manage both. And sort of the way that I've been able to is, it's definitely, I said, okay, I'm gonna actually invest capital and I'm gonna make sure that this business grows. And I'm able to support it and be able to do both. And so that was, I got a business loan. I also have my own, capital. And, I said, I'm going to push the gas on this thing. And, and also there were some TRUBLUE owners where folks have asked them, if you could do anything different, what would you have done? And they said, we would have pushed our foot on the gas harder from day one. And so, I hired an assistant. I also got a business development representative to help me in different marketing activities. And then obviously, I have the technicians who, are out in the field doing the work. And so, me by myself, I'm sort of just the strategic visionary of the business and, ensuring everyone is doing what they need to. But, it's all about the people. This business cannot survive or thrive without the people.
So 4 employees now?
4 employees. Actually, we have 5. We also have a part-time estimator who also helps, and he's actually a handyman too. So it's kind of weird. We throw him in, and he can install grab bars and things like that. So I've been fortunate now. I think we have a good crew, and we'll continue to scale and expand, and hopefully become the most trusted professional home service company in LA. That's my grand vision, and we don't want to be a one and done. We don't want to be a pop and drop. And so it's a very measured approach to make sure that we're operationally sound, that our customers are giving us 5-star reviews. And I was okay in the early days where, a lot of the jobs weren't necessarily coming in, being the new guy on the block and being in a very saturated LA market. But I said, if we continue to do the right things, if we can stay consistent, we keep delighting customers, the work will come. The work will come. And now it's actually, it's actually coming faster than I kind of expected. And so, but it was tough in the early days. Yeah.
Yeah. And well, what was the hardest part in the early days? I mean, is it the fact that you don't know anything about this business? I mean, the fact that you're a builder is great. You were inclined to that type of business, but you weren't doing that business.
Yeah. The early day, truthfully, it was hiring the technicians was the hardest part because, a lot of these guys have not worked in structured organizations, and the way TRUBLUE operates is, again, we have a higher level of standards. All of our technicians are background checked and screened. Everyone goes through senior home safety training, and so it was more so I was concerned with getting the right individuals to be able to represent myself, TRUBLUE, and honestly the entire TRUBLUE family, because that's how I look at it. It's not, I'm representing a whole host of other owners, their families, and everyone else, and I don't take that lightly. And so, yeah, that was the hardest part, and then just managing the business and learning the system, knowing how to communicate with customers, and it also knowing how to estimate jobs. And again, AI has helped me quite a bit to be able to get up to speed on certain projects and things like that where I didn't know. But that's definitely been the hardest part because I'm having to trust people to do things that I can't necessarily do myself. Over the
Yeah.
entire course of my career, I could do everything. If I had somebody quit, doesn't matter. I could do the work, and so that's actually been a challenge. That was probably the most challenging part is having to really rely on your team and the technicians.
So you're just in your infancy. In the first year, you still kept your job. How do you really manage that? It just so happens you have a flexible job, right? Where you can answer the phone when one of your team call you.
Yeah. So I actually spoke to my job. They know that I'm running this business. So I told them, I said, hey, I bought a franchise and I'm going to have to limit the amount of time that I could spend, on this type of work. And they were totally okay with it. Again, I had been with this organization for 8 years or so, and they
Good.
said that was fine. And again, the finance accounting work, that stuff generally I can do in my sleep. It was more so the meetings and all of those types of things. And so they worked with me. They allowed me to sort of reduce the number of reports that I had, direct reports. And so, I join meetings sort of as I can, but their willingness to allow me to manage both has definitely helped quite a bit.
So what do you think the biggest misconception is that people have about buying a franchise? There's a lot of options out there. You can do an acquisition and hope and pray within 10 years you find one of those. You can start something from scratch, which I know your wife would probably kill you over, but or you do a franchise. But what do you think those misconceptions are? And maybe you had one or two.
Yeah, I think, for me, I think I didn't know the breadth of different types of franchise options there were. And so I was thinking it was, okay, like I said, some type of fast food restaurant or some type of laundromat. And so I was thinking they were more brick and mortar. And so brick and mortar, obviously, there's, a substantial amount of cost. I didn't realize there were as many businesses that could be more home based, truthfully, or in the variety of different industries until I started doing research. And there's a scale. There are some that are very low cost to entry, and then they sort of scale up, and so you sort of have a menu of different options based on your interests, and then you can, based on however amount of capital you have to spend. There are cleaning businesses that I saw. I mean, there are people who started with a couple $1,000, and then they continue to scale over time, and they can increase the number of territories. And so that was the biggest misconception. I really didn't even have an idea that there were franchise handyman businesses that could be sort of managed, remotely or home based. So yeah, I was kind of just thinking kind of the brick and mortars.
Yeah. So TrueBlue has a leaderboard, as it's called, for the top performing franchisees that are doing $1 million plus in revenue. So what does it take from here, being a new franchisee, to get on the leaderboard?
Yeah, for me, it starts with having a solid base of repeat customers and people who can refer business to you. I'd say that's one. And so it starts with delighting every single customer, which we try to do. It doesn't matter if this is a person we're changing, the locks on their door, to somebody we're doing a ceiling repair for, or we're doing a more extensive like exterior stucco repair or water leak repair, which are some things that we're working on now. And so it's being consistent in my mind. It's sticking with the market. Marketing is extremely important. And so TrueBlue does a lot of national marketing, but then on the local level, it's up to us in terms of, making sure our social channels are, filled with content and we're doing things routinely. Making sure we're focusing on LinkedIn and Facebook, and then on Nextdoor, and just being really active in that area. And also, your Google Business profile is huge. I didn't know really much about Google Business, and how much that influences the amount of leads that people get. Because out of the gate, if you searched TruBlue South Bay, we're on like the fifth page. I mean, if you get to the fifth page. And so I also hired a digital marketing company to help with content and creating content for us. And then we also get content from a woman who works in the senior space, and then her posts are more senior focused. And so really staying active on social media and on the local marketing. And then now also with the seniors, it's being involved in the community is huge. I joined the Chamber of Commerce about a month ago. I also joined a senior group just recently. I just got accepted this week that has a host of different folks who work in the senior industry. We're going to be doing, some trade shows next month. One is a senior expo, one is a South Bay expo. So really making sure that you're networking, you're out in the community, and then just making, not getting too overwhelmed and trying to do too many things at once. And just I think consistency and discipline is huge.
That's awesome. So what advice would you have for prospective first-time business owners? Think of yourself, 2 years ago. What would you say to those folks right now about a franchise and TruBlue, and what advice would you share?
Yeah, I'd say first of all, because you do devote so much time to the business, is pick something that interests you and that that you feel when you wake up in the morning, because every day something goes wrong. I'm not, that's just the way it works. And the way you get through that is having your North Star. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And so if you have a business where you can answer that question daily, it really helps you get through those sort of rough patches and periods. And so that's number one. And then number two, trying not to, and you mentioned the leaderboard, is trying not to compare yourself to what everyone is doing. And so one thing in the franchise business, the corporate office will give you a lot of different options. You'll hear a lot of different things that owners in Florida are doing or New York are doing. They're like, hey, we're on Nextdoor and this is great, or hey, we're doing Facebook marketing and this is great. But the thing is every market is different, and so you really have to adapt. You have to listen to what's going on. You have to try different things. Maybe Facebook works over there, but it doesn't work here. Maybe Thumbtack works over there, but it doesn't over here. And just being really flexible. And it's just like, trying and iterating and trying and iterating, and just staying at it. I think mindset is huge. No matter even the days when, things weren't necessarily going well. I mean, staying positive is probably the biggest piece of it. And just staying, just remaining, humble and disciplined. That's my biggest advice.
Well, you heard it here from Anthony, the CPA. Or maybe recovering CPA by now, right?
I'm recovering. I don't do taxes anymore. I try not to do too much, but yeah, I still do have that title, attached to me. So that's fine.
Anthony, you were a joy to interview. Thank you for being here, and I wish you continued success, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Lance.